Good morning. It is July 2nd, 2025, and this is your morning briefing on Anchor Watch with Bobby Jones. Now, typically, I have a little 5-minute video to kick off my subscribers' day, but after what happened yesterday, I'm kind of switching it up. Number one, this is free to anybody who subscribed, premium or not, but most importantly, this is going to be a little bit longer. I want people to understand the full effect of what happened in the U.S. Senate when they passed H.R. 1, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, on a margin of one vote, 51 to 50. The Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, had to cast the deciding factor. But a lot of people keep hearing about this. Let's talk about what they actually passed. And I'm just going to hit the highlights. I went through the original bill, 900 pages, and it was pretty dang dry. Then I looked at various summaries. Heck, I even had ChatGPT try to break the thing down. But I think I have a pretty good idea of what was debated, what was passed, and now this is going to the House. And you'll see why there are even a lot of conservatives that may have an issue with this. So the overview is very simple. Big, huge bill. The key themes, though: tax cuts, deregulation, spending reductions, and it's backed by Trump and specifically the Republican leadership. That would be specifically the Speaker of the House and the Senate Majority Leader. The thing that jumps out immediately: Medicaid changes, work requirements, 80 hours a month. The eligibility for Medicaid will be determined every 6 months, which, depending on where you live, logistically could be an issue. Depending on how you physically are, it could be a very big hassle. And then, of course, reproductive health providers are eliminated from Medicaid, and anything that has to do with trans care. But most importantly, you're looking at additional paperwork, too, to prove that you need to stay on it, and you're going to have to do it more often because the threat of fraud is what the Republicans have been pushing here. Very easy for those in Congress to meet those paperwork requirements, not so much maybe in South Georgia, where I'm close to. Prescription drugs and Medicare, negotiating for better prices, pretty much going out the window. Make no mistake, the things that were passed here make things better for big pharma to increase drug prices. So the regulations, you know, how President Biden had the insulin cap, all that goes out of the window. And if you're trying to get a specific type of drug, you know, negotiation timelines are extended, which will make it more expensive. Fewer drugs available, higher costs because of cost and demand. It's basically a bill that helps big pharma. Additionally, the actual Healthcare Affordable Care Act, aka Obamacare Marketplace, and the insurance attached to it, well, it ends special enrollments for people of lower income. And so what you're going to have is people who cannot afford health care the most have options that were barely available now eliminated. They'll be sicker. They won't have any health care coverage, no subsidies that will cover things like abortion, which, you know, is part of women's health care. Gender affirmation, that's completely gone. But a completely lower access. We're talking up to 13 million people may lose their health care insurance because of this bill. And the way they're doing it is federal government will no longer fund certain things and expect the states to pick it up when the states already could not afford to help insure their own population. So that's the dastardly deed there. That goes into SNAP, aka food stamps, food assistance cuts, getting cut all over the place. You know, work rules for certain parents not understanding the domestic situation, work requirements for people up to age 65. And, you know, depending on what your physical state is, having to prove that you cannot work or having to prove that you can. It's a completely different layer here. And then states are now going to have to do the copay for SNAP benefits. And so when you think about most of the red states take in more money from the federal government than they contribute, that's going to be a problem, a significant problem. And it's going to target the very people who overwhelmingly voted for President Trump. Just keep that in mind. Internet, utilities deductions, all that stuff will be limited to help people make it through and make it by. It's going to go out the window because they believe it's free. They believe that, people don't pay into it and this, that, and the other and withdraw it. So the war on education is seen in this bill. Student loans, the end of subsidized federal student loans, no interest protection. That's a significant thing. Cap on lifetime of borrowing, harder to defer payments during hardship or unemployment. And that's significant for a lot of kids because coming out of college, I don't know if you know, it's been very hard for this generation to get hired. You tell them to go to college, get all this experience, get all this education, but then they're told they don't have any experience. And it makes it harder. And then the starting salaries are lower, so you have a higher rate of kids that are highly educated going back home to live with mom and dad because they cannot find a job. The environmental protections, clean energy. This is why Elon Musk is losing his mind over this bill because it basically destroys the EV, electric vehicle incentives, and the infrastructure that was supposed to be built along to encourage that. But people of lower income definitely will not be able to afford electric vehicles, even though in the long run it could prove to be cheaper based on what they do for a living. The tax credit's gone. As a matter of fact, as someone who owns an EV, I will be taxed more for owning an electrical vehicle than if I just had a conventional combustion engine vehicle. But the grants, the research, the things for school buses, ports, air monitors, EPA level things, gone. Tax policy. Wow. The main thing and the main reason this bill was pushed to the forefront in the first place was to keep those 2017 tax cuts that President Trump passed fully in the forefront. If you remember, it was the only major piece of legislation that he passed in that first term. It was the only one he really cared about too. Had that big White House garden party to announce it. It basically keeps that estate tax threshold at $15 million. And child tax credit is increased, but not refundable for poorest families, meaning they won't get a refund with their taxes when they file like they have in years past. And if you know anything about that tax credit, there are people who rely on that tax refund to help make ends meet. That will probably go away as well. Tip, overtime deductions, all these things that they've talked about where there'll be no taxing on tips, etc. We'll see if that jives with the House's version of this bill. Consumer protection, gone. Defunding of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. They see it as another layer of regulation, even though it is protection. Environmental justice, gone. Review of fast track projects being reviewed by courts to make sure no one's in danger, the consumer, both environmentally and the use of product, gone, just gutted. Another major point of this whole bill, immigration and border, protections and policies, there will be asylum fees. So the people who are poor and scared enough to come to the border trying to get in the United States now will have to try to figure out a way to pay, asylum fees, temporary protected status, which will affect a lot of people, especially down there in South Florida. Those fees come into effect. The DACA kids, who were protected under President Obama, now they're going to have to do reapplications and more fees. They're basically going to continue the deportations and then make life hard on those who had legal protection to be here. They'll charge them financially. They will continue to terrorize them psychologically with the ICE raids. And this is basically codifying all of these policies. Federal worker retirements, it's as simple as this may seem, basically raising the retirement age 65, you having to pay more into your retirement pension. And then if you feel like you've been unjustly fired, you have to pay out of pocket to deal with it. I mean, I don't know what else to say about that. As I mentioned earlier, the new vehicle fees, I now have to pay an additional tax because I have an electronic vehicle. And this is going to dissuade lower income drivers from making that investment where it could be cheaper for them in the long run. Bottom line is, I just scratched the surface of some of the stuff that happened. But make no mistake, middle and lower income families going to lose food aid, health care, educational support, consumer protections. There have been some organizations that said, hey, there will be 55,000 Americans that will die directly because of this bill if it's passed this way. And that's not even talking about the millions that will lose health care, the millions that will suffer from food shortages and those type of programs. That includes veterans and military members. You know, there are military members that use SNAP. I know people don't realize that, but that is a real thing. The tax breaks that the wealthy and the corporations will have, they'll be more permanent. Deregulation has increased, and they will get a state tax break. So those who were born wealthy will get a break from being wealthy in a lot of respects. All the environmental protections are going to be gutted through lack of funding. And then, of course, immigration, new fees, reduced benefits, and higher enforcement. This is changing America's social contract. It changes the role of government and how it interacts with its people. It's not going to benefit the majority of Americans, which are middle class and lower class Americans. The rules that are associated just to get access to these benefits are going to make it much harder. It's going to dissuade people from trying to get them, which is the whole point. And so you, me, everybody as Americans, we have to ask ourselves, what are the long-term effects of something like this? Because in the short term, yeah, it's going to be painful, but it could literally destroy America as we know it if these things stay in place. Meanwhile, all these things that President Trump promised, you know, from Medicaid not being touched to, the no tips, the taxes, all of these things are not happening the way he said it was going to happen. It's almost like he was lying. And I say that sarcastically because that's what he does. But this is now going to go back to the House, and we're going to see what happens, because the House, because of their election cycles every 2 years, are definitely more sensitive to these changes than the Senate. And the Senate barely passed it, only with the vice president sitting in on it. So call your House representative if you think this is crazy. I definitely think it's crazy. I think it's ridiculous. And to be completely honest, the American people need to speak up, because if this passes this time next year, you're going to have a heck of a lot more sicker Americans struggling harder with an economy that's not going to be active towards them and no help from the government.